to work.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. As I say in my blog today to accompany this podcast, they say that a week in politics is a long time, and so it has proved this week. This is probably one of the most damaging weeks ever in the history of Scottish independence. And it's what we're going to discuss today mainly. There'll be some other topic. It's mainly the decisions taken reached yesterday at the SNP conference. Alan, you watched it online, and I don't know how you felt when you saw the speeches and the vote come out, and what you thought was the outcome with it was what you'd expected, or did it anger you? Were you surprised? But before we do that, let's just remind the viewers, they have now voted the SNP through at their conference to have an SNP 1-2 strategy, and then get one more mandate, and they'll go to Westminster, and Keir Starmer, or whoever's the Prime Minister at the time for England, will automatically say, oh yes, that's okay, you can have your referendum. That's what John's counting on. But this is just from 2 weeks ago.
Will you allow, that is in your power, it's your decision, will you allow a second independence referendum?
At the last budget, we had a record settlement for Scotland, more money than has ever been given to Scotland under the budget.
You're not answering my question. I
will come to that. I just want to
well, we're nearly out of time, sir.
Because the point about independence for me is it's a distraction tactic which is always deployed by the SNP when they don't want a discussion about their
You won
record.
a majority at the last election. You're doing things that weren't in your manifesto. If the SNP win a majority, why can't they do what's in their manifesto?
I'm expressing my deeply held view that whenever the SNP are pressed on their record in office,
but you're not ruling it out. You're not ruling out an independence referendum.
We're not having an independence referendum. It is a
So you are ruling it out. It won't happen.
It won't happen. It is a distraction.
Despite, even if they win a majority.
It is a distraction from the record of the SNP.
And yet, Alan, John Swinney stood on the lectern yesterday saying how they couldn't refuse it, and as soon as they got a majority, just like 2011, that they would crumble and give us a Section 30. Nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, this is the anniversary of Alex Salmond's death, and SNP have just kicked him in the teeth. They are dancing over his grave. The man who took us to inches of being independent, and it's just, it's shocking. I'm disgusted. I'm not surprised at they voted the way they did. I just thought it would have been a lot closer. I mean, it's 80% of the SNP in that room voted against having an independent strategy going into 2026. What I would like to know is, do their members support that decision? Or was it just those who were allowed to go to the conference? I mean,
sorry to interrupt you, but the fact is, that is the voice of the members. That is so the membership decision is yes, they agree.
Yep, I mean, in a normal conference that should be the position, but the SNP run a very strict and vetted conference where they like to bring in their own people. But the other ones who are opposed to the position, I mean, you have one other blogger who was doing his blog saying this is an unworkable position. Let's get behind it. That is the wrong strategy. If it is a wrong position, we are not getting independence through this. You've got to waken up and start following those who will give us a route to independence. I mean, Swinney has said that this is a new start, and it's a fresh start. It's about as fresh as a pie that's been sitting in a flipping bus for 3 days. It's not going to work. And let's be honest, it's not a fresh start. It's new branding of failure. Because that's what the SNP have been doing for the last 11 years. They have been failing, and they've just been coming up with new polished slogans. And the slogans do not work. And a lot of things that they said yesterday, we've heard before. They're going to listen to the people. Well, John, a poll before your conference took a vote on that, the people said they wanted a united movement. You voted against that. So you are not listening to the people. Then they talked about focus on competence. It's your government that is bringing in incompetence, John. Look at what you're pushing instead of what you should be pushing. You should be pushing independence, nothing less. You should be running that parliament as if it is an independent parliament. You should be forcing the Westminster government to use Section 35 so we could go to the United Nations and say, see, we're not allowed to govern ourselves because this colonial government are overruling every single decision that we are taking. That's what you should be doing. I mean, people did not vote for the SNP to manage the union. We voted you in to end this union. So why have you not done this, John? I mean, you're taking your orders from the Westminster Parliament, who have had a stranglehold on the people of Scotland, and ripping this country off. They are taking all our money while we have people in this country starving. We have pensioners in this country who will be freezing to death this winter because of this Westminster government that you are bending the knee to. I mean, if you want a fresh start, John, let me give you a little example of what to do. Stop running the country as if we are a regional council. Take control of our destiny. Start using the SNP not as a manager of Westminster, but as a leader of this nation to get us independence. Because you're just, I mean, you're arguing that you've got to convince soft nose. I'll let you into a wee secret, John. You've got more chance of finding Nessie in this country than what you have of finding a soft no, because soft no's do not exist.
Correct.
If you want to go to the people in this country for a poll on independence, we are talking about independence reaching 60, 70%. Where's your soft nose in that, John? The rest are staunch unionists, British nationalists, who you have got no chance of converting. So get your finger out your backside and get doing the job what you're doing. But I'll tell you one thing, that decision yesterday did do. It showed the SNP constituency candidates are no longer prepared to put independence on that ballot paper. So if anybody wants independence, come forward now. We have got 21 candidates already in place for constituencies. We need more. We need every single constituency in Scotland to have a Liberate Scotland candidate. So please come forward, put your name forward, put your head above the parapet like myself and Eva and many others, and we will take this fight to the streets of Scotland because the SNP are not going to do it. So let's do what the Irish did in 1918. Let's remove the hurdles and get the people in place that will actually fight this cause.
Hear, hear. Eva, this was John Swinney earlier in the week giving us a taste of what he was going to do at the conference.
The party's going to have a democratic debate about this issue, but what I want the party to focus on is providing a credible and rational route that will deliver independence, because we've got to be certain that the choices we make will actually result in delivering independence. And we know that from the election in 2011, when the SNP won a majority in the Scottish Parliament, a referendum on independence flowed from that. And we've had independence majorities in the Parliament, but not SNP majorities, and we've not been able to make that progress on the constitutional question. So recognising that we've got to have an agreed route to independence means I think we've got to take the approach that I've set out to the conference, which is about the party achieving a majority and ensuring that Scotland is able to decide on her constitutional future.
Two of the words he used there, Eva, a credible and rational plan. Now, how in the name of the wee man can he call going for a Section 30 to be credible? How can he call it rational when every Prime Minister and every leader of every opposition party in England has said they will never agree? How can he, when the Supreme Court have ruled it out, how can he call that credible and rational?
I barely know where to begin, Roddy, but I have to begin by marking the fact that today is the sad first anniversary of the death of Alex Salmond. And Scotland has had many courageous leaders, and they've been more courageous, with bigger hearts and greater aspirations and plans and motivations than John Swinney currently has. And I can do no better than to quote from Alex Salmond from May 2011. I've got it in front of me and I look at it every day, and he said, "This party, the Scottish Party, the National Party, carries your hope, and we shall carry it carefully." And that was his speech when he became First Minister for the second time in 2011. And it is so sad to see how very low that great party has fallen, because we here were all in the SNP as we understood it was the vehicle, the party to take us forwards in a united fashion towards our country's independence. And the reasons why we are no longer members of the SNP are myriads. However, it boils down now, regardless of individual policies and decisions and motivations about policies that have divided our movement and divided our country, this boils down to the question of unity and how unity within the movement can be achieved and what the movement currently comprises. And John Swinney and Keith Brown and Stephen Gethins and all of those who supported yesterday's motion deliberately were utterly myopic, ignorant of the fact that there is at least a 20% gap between those who support the SNP and those who support independence for our nation. That gap will not be bridged by the policy that was announced and rubber stamped yesterday by people who clearly either don't care or don't understand what it is they've done. You know, we often say, God forgive me, for they know not what they do. Well, did they know yesterday what they did? What they did by approving this policy was to continue the division within the movement and the division within the party. What they did not do was look into their hearts and souls and say, what are we here to do? What is our principal motivation? It wasn't about precedents. It wasn't about bums on seats. The SNP of old would have been Robert Curran, Walter McAdam, Winnie Ewing. They would have been knocking the chairs and the desks over and shouting and screaming to get to the front of the stage to say to people, what are you here to do? You're here to deliver independence. You're not here to deliver bums on seats. You're here to take our country towards freedom. And that no longer means voting SNP. It means uniting the movement. People aren't going to vote SNP when they've seen women particularly, their rights trashed. They're not going to vote SNP when they see that there are difficulties within schools and public authorities and Police Scotland and prisons and every aspect of public life. But they might have voted SNP, or they might have supported them if the SNP were prepared to put a hand of friendship out to the other independent supporting parties and say, let us all together collectively carry Scotland's hopes in our hands. Let us collectively understand that we carry that hope carefully, because that's the responsibility that we've got to the people of Scotland, born and as yet to be born, that we have to stand together as a nation, not divided by party principles or party motivations. If they had said, pass Amendment A because it's the right thing to do, we could have all been rolling our sleeves up today and talking about the real unification of the movement. I most likely would have phoned Keith Brown and said, you're okay, son, I'm standing down. I'm not going to stand against you. I support your campaign. And by the way, there's a couple of dozen other candidates for Liberate Scotland who are similarly minded, because the purpose of the exercise is to create the circumstances whereby our country becomes independent. It's not about electing individuals onto a gravy train for another 5 years. By the way, Roddy, I put out a tweet yesterday because I was so enraged by this. I went back a little bit in time to see all the promises that Keith Brown has made. So yesterday he said, there is going to be a convention. The work has already started. And then he said, the work will start tomorrow. It will be a civic convention. It's not an independence convention that he's announcing. He announced a convention of people who believe that Scotland has the right to decide, the right to choose, which means his convention won't be populated solely by independence supporters. It will include people who don't support independence, but support the right to decide. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to go to unionists and ask them to join his club. All he had to do was to speak to the rest of the movement and get us all together. And 100 of us, or 1,000 of us, or 10,000 of us would have all shown the spirit and the courage and the determination that Alex Salmond and Winnie Ewing and so many more did, but which now seems to have been replaced in the leadership of the SNP by cowardice, by the Oliver Twist mentality, and by the repetition of the policy that has not worked in the last 11 years, a begging bowl. Go to Westminster, plead for a referendum, and when they say no, back to the drawing board, because there's no plan B. Scotland deserves far better.
Absolutely, 100% correct. Lloyd, as Eve has alluded to, there was 21 Liberate Scotland candidates who were there, willing to negotiate. If there was a united front, they were willing to do that. That's not going to happen now. We need more than 21. We need every seat covered, because when the SNP are talking about SNP 1-2, surely they must know that they will get the same outcome as you get in 2016 and as we got on in 2021. All it will do is elect unionists. That's what's going to happen. Why would they do this? They must know that they're going to elect unionists by an SNP 1-2.
Yes, well, that's all true, Roddy. And if this were a normal world and the Scottish National Party had an intellectual wing, then the people would be aware that that's effectively what they voted for yesterday. I mean, for me, yesterday and the decision that the conference made to continue repeating the same failed strategies of before effectively is the day that the Scottish National Party as a means to achieve independence died. The SNP died yesterday in terms of it being the leading force of the independence movement. And I think it's now become completely incumbent on any and everyone who supports the idea of independence to come forward now, because the SNP must be challenged directly at the next election and directly on both the constituency ballot and on the regional list, because it's simply straightforwardly intellectually bankrupt for the Scottish National Party to say to the people of Scotland that they will deliver independence by means of asking Britain again for a referendum. This is something which is not going to happen. The fact that they refuse to discuss any alternative options makes it very, very plain that the Scottish National Party now are a very firm part of the British fabric of politics, that they have learned nothing from 2014. They've learned, the main lesson they haven't learned is that the people of this country came so close to their independence on the 18th of September 2014 that it scared the living daylights out of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, because without our natural resources, without our human resources, effectively Britain is bankrupt. It's bankrupt as it stands, but it becomes considerably more bankrupt if such a thing exists. If you effectively take 18 to 20% of the economy of the United Kingdom and remove it, then the United Kingdom no longer has the status that it had on the 17th of September 2014. And the fact is that Britain has moved every possible lever it can to maintain the union. And I think what we witnessed yesterday was one of those levers is in actual fact the Scottish National Party. The Scottish National Party has been subsumed into the British political system. It's operating within the British political system. It is not seeking to break the British political system. And as a result of yesterday, then it's incumbent on anyone and everyone who genuinely believes that Scotland should be an independent country and that our children should have a proper future, engaged in the world, that they withdraw their support for the Scottish National Party. Because support for the Scottish National Party is continuance of the Union, it's support for the Union, and it's the maintenance of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, no more and no less. The fact that such an intellectually bankrupt strategy could be voted for by members of the Scottish National Party, it doesn't shock me, because I've seen the manipulation and the removal of any critical thinking in the Scottish National Party since the day and hour that Alex Salmond stood down as leader of the Scottish National Party. I've seen the First Ministership of Nicola Sturgeon, of Hamza Yousaf, and now John Swinney effectively remove any form of internal dissent, which used to be called debate. But in John's world, anyone who doesn't agree with John is an enemy. And I know this because, unlike the three of you, John Swinney was my boss when I was a member of the Scottish National Party. When John became the leader after Alex Salmond decided he was going to return to Westminster, which led us into 3, possibly 4 of the darkest years in the early 20th century for the Scottish National Party, where we lost 20% of our vote. We lost over 250,000 votes in the 2003 Scottish Parliament election, and the party was nearly reduced to a rump when, in actual fact, we should have been pressing forward the case of independence. All of that happened under the watch of one man and one man only, and that man was John Swinney. Mm-hmm. That's the John Swinney who destroyed, or attempted to destroy, Margot MacDonald, one of the great heroines of the national movement. Yeah. Removed her effectively from the playing field and forced her into the situation where she had to stand as an independent. And that should have been the lesson for John. Because in reality, when Margot MacDonald was driven out of the Scottish National Party because of the cowardice and the jealousy of the likes of Nicola Sturgeon and John Swinney, effectively, if there had been 2 Margot MacDonalds at the 2003 election, 2 Margot MacDonalds would have been elected by the good people of the Lothian region. Because she had status, she had intellect, and the people had faith in her. None of these things can be said about John Swinney. The people of this country do not have faith. Look at the last 11 local council by-elections. The SNP vote is in freefall. This is exactly what happened in 2001, 2, 3, and into the election 2004. John Swinney is not the friend of the people of Scotland. John Swinney is not a friend of the movement for independence. And the Scottish National Party, in my eyes, died yesterday afternoon, abandoned entirely the people of this country for the sake of the comfort and the pensions and the gravy train. And that's a sad, sad, sad indictment of the fact that, having pushed for so many years, having led us, forced the British to grant us a devolved parliament, having then pushed us to the point of coming within 5% of becoming an independent country, that John Swinney, Nicola Sturgeon and Hamza Yousaf have taken us to this place, a dark, dark place for anybody who believes in the independence of our country, and a place that we have to do everything we possibly can to remove ourselves from. And the way to do that is for people who truly believe that this country should be independent. You now have to step forward and accept the challenge laid down to us by John Swinney and the cowards of the Scottish National Party leadership. Take on the challenge. They've challenged us that in May 2026, those that truly believe in independence have to step forward, challenge the Scottish National Party, and effectively remove them from the political landscape, because they are the barrier to our country's future.
Yeah. Just like the Irish Parliamentary Party was removed in 1918, folks, it can be done, and it can be done in one election. You'll see really along the bottom a banner for Liberate Scotland's website. Go to that website, get involved, fill in the form below, and get involved. We need candidates. They need campaigners. We need everything. We've now got a further enemy. It's terrible to say that. And I speak to someone who joined that party in 1968 while still a school child. I know I look much younger, don't I? But the fact is, I'm heartbroken. I was heartbroken when I left. But now, Alan, when you look at that, we know the strategy, what SNP 1-2 won't work. It's about winning an election. Excuse me, it's about winning an election. It's not about getting independence.
No, and other independence parties have to look at that. for advice that they've been given to their supporters. I mean, Alba Party, a number of their candidates or proposed candidates have been saying to vote SNP on the constituency. Now, Alba have their conference next week. I think the people of Scotland have a right to know what Alba's position is on this now. Will they continuously tell people to vote SNP on the constituency, knowing fine that those votes will not be counted towards independence? Because those people are standing on the constituencies to get themselves on the British gravy train. So people of Scotland must know what every single politician that's going to put their name forward for election is proposing. Now, I would urge Alba yet again to get on board with Liberate Scotland. I mean, when we started, we said quite openly, we put our hand of friendship out to the entire movement, and seats on constituencies would be up for negotiations. Well, those negotiations have now closed with the SNP. We will not be negotiating with an organisation that is actively campaigning against the independence of our country, because that is what the SNP are doing, standing on these constituencies and refusing to have these votes counted as independent votes. I mean, Swinney, his route to independence is just like sturgeons. It is absolutely nothing. It's all garnish. There's no nutrition for the movement. The movement needs something to get its jaws into. Motivate the people. Because, John, I'll tell you now, after your nonsense yesterday, we are taking the baton of independence out of you politicians' hands, and we're putting it firmly into the hands of the Scottish people. And in 2026, the Scottish people will be going over that finishing line for independence. And if you are not on board at that stage, then get out the way. Move to England, because we are saying this line, this far and no further. We will not desert the people of Scotland. The people of Scotland have suffered too long under this Westminster rule. It's time to free them. You're on mute, Roddy.
That's because I was coughing away there. I was just saying to Alan before we come on to air, Eva, it was like an analogy I used. It's like the battle, just before the Battle of Culloden, that someone comes to Bonnie Prince Charlie and says, by the way, sire, there's a fleet there's fleets in the Moray Firth. There's a Spanish army, there's a French army, and there's a Dutch army who want to come join in and help you to win. And Bonnie Prince Charlie said, no, we don't want. We want to do it like Bannockburn, where we did it on our own. Tell them to beat it. That's what they've done to us. They've told the Yes movement, the 20% you're talking about, they've told us to beat it, because this is about winning an election. It's not about winning independence.
Again, I can do no better than quote somebody far better than me. No man has a right to fix the boundary on the march of a nation. And yesterday, John Swinney and Keith Brown, they did that. They fixed a boundary. And they did that for party political purposes, because they put, yet again, party before country. In the olden days, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, when we voted for the SNP, we knew that we were voting for our country. We knew that we were voting for the betterment of our country. We knew that the SNP was absolutely laser focused on a single priority, and it was the independence of our nation, because we, although we were in the minority all these years ago, we knew and we understood completely that independence was the right thing for our country, not only for reasons of history or heritage, or because of Bruce or Wallace or, Bonnie Prince Charlie or the Jacobites, or all those people who had suffered and languished because of clearances and because of poverty and want, deprivation, exploitation, not just because of all of those really important reasons, but because independence is the only method by which the people of Scotland, all of the people of Scotland, will be able to realise, attempt to realise, have the opportunity to realise their potential. And what John Swinney and what Keith Brown did yesterday, and all those lick-spittle toadies that agreed with him, that stood there with their cards up and their lanyards, their stupid bloody lanyards, stronger for Scotland, standing up for Scotland. What they did was that they prolonged the agonies of the people of Scotland who are suffering unnecessarily because we are not an independent country. They prolonged the drugs deaths. They prolonged deaths through alcoholism. They prolong poverty and want. They prolong the difficulties that there are for care experienced people. They prolong the housing emergency. And they're doing that because they're sitting comfortably upon a gravy train, or they're standing there with one foot on the gravy train and the other one on the platform. And they know perfectly well that if they vote against the leadership, the foot that's on the gravy train will get kicked back off and they'll be standing down on the platform again. Well, it's folk like me and Alan and Lloyd that are standing on the platform beside the small folk. We're not looking to be jumping on a train. We're looking at a better destination than jumping into a fancy gravy train position where what you get is money and status and fancy food and office folk that look after you. Our destination is the hope and the potential of the people of Scotland when we can walk down any street in any town in Scotland and see that people are full of hope, that bairns aren't running about with their backside hanging out of their trousers or their soles hanging off their trainers, where mums are able to go and buy food to feed their children properly, where dads go to work and they earn a decent wage, where grannies aren't greeting because they're bringing up grandchildren because their own children are addicted to drugs or to drink. The destination that we're looking for Scotland is the destination Scotland should have, which is a peaceable, peace-loving country where we look after everybody and where the opportunity to go on in the world doesn't depend on where you come from, what your name is, what school you went to, or who you've soaked into to get into a position in the world, where you're rewarded and awarded just for being born in a country that treats everybody the same. And yesterday, those folk that voted with John Swinney and Keith Brown denied that opportunity for a generation if it was left to them. Well, it'll no be left to them, because the likes of us are going to make bloody well sure that Scotland's got a choice next year to make the world stand up, take notice, and get Scotland jumping back on.
Here, well said. Let me be devil's advocate for a minute, Lloyd. Let's just imagine, we know it's virtually impossible. We know that 2011 was a fluke. But let's imagine that fluke happens again and John manages to get his majority of seats. And he goes down to Westminster to deal with these people. I mean, I just want to go, this goes back a few years, actually. And this was not long after our Parliament set up and the SNP were in their minority government. And this is a Scots-born English nationalist, leader of the Liberal Party at the time, Malcolm Bruce. Hear what he had to say. Listen for the last sentence, folks.
And I was very pleased, having been the leader of my party in Scotland at that time, to work with the late Donald Dewar to set up the framework of what became the Scotland Act, and that he and I helped to deliver. I had one disagreement with him, which I think were the outcome of which I was right, which was the actual voting system. I supported the voting system, as did he in the end, but we had an argument about whether the elected members, additional members, should be elected on the basis of a second vote or the adjustment on the first vote. My view was that we should adjust on the first vote, and I think I was right. We wouldn't have had an SNP majority if we stuck with that system. So, unfortunately, it just tells us we're going to have to address this issue in the future.
And I think I was right. We wouldn't have had an SNP majority.
There you go. They're admitting, that they're going to rig it again. We have to come back and look at it because we can't have the SNP winning. The whole system, Lloyd, was set up so that two parties had to win. One party cannot win, but he's still going with SNP 1-2, knowing full well that he can't win. The union has rigged it.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. But of course they were going to do that. Let's not forget, the United Kingdom becomes a considerably poorer country than it is today when Scotland leaves. The fact of the matter is we contribute somewhere between 18 and 20% of their economy. They cannot afford Scotland to leave, which is why we as a country cannot afford not to leave. Because the only way that we can move forward as a nation is by both the use and the exploitation of our own natural and human resources to the fullest extent, to be able to provide for our people, and as Eva said, allow everybody to achieve their potential. But you know, the rigged voting system, Swinney understands this completely. He understands exactly what's going on here. What he's effectively saying to people is, vote for us, so we can turn around and moan after we don't get the majority next year. That's really what's happening. Yeah. He knows that. Now, but the other side of this is, this has been one hell of a week, and I'm reminded of the fact that there was a debate in our Parliament this week which would have allowed an open and proper debate about how we address addiction in our country. The curse of addiction that's killing people, that's ruining families, that's creating havoc of all different sorts. And that the focus of that is on potential. Because every person with an addiction, be it gambling, be it drugs, be it alcohol, be it any of the many things, the fact of the matter is those are people with potential. And we as a country have a responsibility to allow those people to maximise the potential that they have. But if you shut down a debate in the wicked manner in which the Scottish National Party and the Scottish Green Party did on one of the most important issues of our country, to shut it down purely on a political basis because you don't want to, as they said it themselves, we don't want to give oxygen to the Tory party. This was absolutely appalling behaviour. Effectively, the Scottish National Party and the Green Party, the so-called supporters of independence, the so-called parties of independence, the so-called parties of the people of this country, effectively said, we don't give a damn about you. We don't care about you people. Now, extrapolate that. What happened yesterday was exactly that again. Was again the Scottish National Party turning to the people of this country and saying, no, our interests are of far greater importance than the ordinary people. Yeah. And I'm minded when I watched the platform party, there's a particular individual sits in the middle of the table. His name's Ian McCann. And he's been an apparatchik of the Scottish National Party for nigh on 30 years. And I remember very particularly in 2001 when asked by a journalist what he thought the opinion of the party membership was on a particular issue, Mr. McCann turned round and said, when we want to know their opinion, we'll tell them what it is. And that's exactly the attitude that John Swinney's SNP has towards not only their own membership, but towards the people of this country. They are selfish, self-centred narcissists, following in a long line of narcissists since Nicola Sturgeon and Humza Yousaf. And at the moment, as a member, card-carrying member of the Scottish National Party, the only victory I can see for the people of this country is the utter and complete destruction of the Scottish National Party at next year's election, because they have betrayed. They have betrayed the wishes of the people, they betrayed the dreams of the people, and if we allow them to go any further, they will betray our country totally and completely. It mustn't be allowed to happen. It is absolutely incumbent on all who believe in the independence of our country to ignore entirely these nonsense arguments about splitting the vote, these nonsense arguments about the SNP being the only vehicle. The SNP made clear this week that they are neither the vehicle for creating equality in our country or recognising the potential of our people. And yesterday, on Saturday, they made it very, very clear that they are no longer the vehicle for independence, and therefore they should be removed from the stage as soon as is possible.
We hope that Lloyd's brought that up there, Alan. It's a fact that Scotland has the highest drug deaths in the world, I think, in fact. And this was an opportunity now. Just so, in case anyone doesn't know, it was stopped in the first part. So it could, if it had gone to stage 2, they could have, if the SNP and Greens didn't like it, they could have added amendments. They could have changed the bill till it was their liking. But instead of doing that, as Lloyd said, again, they put their own interests ahead of the people of Scotland. That's just what's the problem with the SNP. It's all about the gravy. It's all about their position. It's all about power. It's not about independence. And it's not about the people.
Yeah, I mean, Scotland has the highest drug deaths in the whole of Europe. Dundee has the highest drug deaths in the whole of Scotland. So this is very, very close to home for me. I mean, the SNP are continuously putting party before the country. Now, the Labour Party did this as well. They've done this in the past, whereas they will not support something unless it is coming from their party, because they do not want to give other politicians any credit for pushing things through. Now, let me make this very clear. This bill was not created by any political party. It was created by the hard work of a dedicated charity to the recovery system for addicts. That should have been top priority, that this was not a political motivated move. This was indeed just to try to save lives within our country of some of our most vulnerable people in the country. And this is one of the biggest problems with party politics. And this is why party politics should be taken out of the equation. And it's one of also the reasons that Liberate Scotland, although we are having to form as a party, will not be operating in the same way as the mainstream parties, because we will not be whipping our candidates or elected people into a position, because their position must be decided by their constituents, by putting their constituents and the country before the needs of a party, because that is what elected members are there for. And people should remember this now for 2026. So somebody mentioned about the splitting the vote. You're no longer splitting an independence vote. You have a choice now on constituencies. You either vote for independence through a Liberate Scotland candidate, or you vote for remaining part of this union with the SNP candidate. It is black and white. That is the choices that you now have. I mean, if you go back into history, you'll see how Scots are our own worst enemy. Go back to William Wallace, who was betrayed by the nobles. Robert the Bruce saw that and acted. So at Bannockburn, he rallied the clans and he rallied the Sma folk to get them on his side to take the battle to England. And because he rallied the people who mattered, the people who independence actually mattered, the Sma folk were won. Then come up to 1707. The lords and nobles betrayed the people of Scotland by signing that fake union. And back up to modern times, we yet again, in the words of Robert Bruce and Robert Burns, have the immortal words that state they were bought and sold for English gold. Such a parcel of rogues in a nation. But Robert Burns also wrote another thing, and this is the one that we should be taking away, because Liberate Scotland will be doing something about this. And it's, then let us pray that come it may, as come it will, for all that sense o' worth our the earth shall bear and grieve, for all that and all that it's coming yet, for all that man to man the world o'er shall brothers be, for all that. But it will only come when you stop chasing the carrots and start backing Liberate Scotland.
Yeah. Yeah, folks, you even get singing cabaret and everything here. Eva is now going to do a juggling trick with 3 chickens and a duck. Fabulous, Alan. As always, you catch me out every bloody week. It's brilliant. I look forward to that more than anything. On this, I've noticed when I was in the early days of the SNP, Eva, I kept hearing, oh, you'll never win a vote. You'll never get a seat. You're too small a party. Oh, no, I'll be voting Labour. I've always been Labour. And all that stuff. You can't do this and this and that. And I'm getting it now. But where it's coming from is the SNP supporters are saying about Liberate Scotland. They're saying about Alapa. You know, you can't, you won't, never going to happen. We've got to grab the bull by the horns, just as the SNP did. That's what's needed.
Look, my mum and dad had it on the doors. I had it on the doors just like you did. I've been Labour all my days, and so were my mum and dad before me. We've got the same thing now. Oh, have I voted SNP? So I'm an SNP voter. People really need to wisen up. But it's incumbent on John Swinney and Keith Brown to start telling the truth for a change. Because yesterday I watched every single speech going out live, and I really hoped and I prayed that I was going to see an epiphany, because John Swinney started off, and I typed this up because I didn't want to miss a word. He said, independence has never been more needed. And I thought, yes, John, you're right. And he said, we need a credible plan. That's right, John. We're languishing in a dismal, hopeless place. Yes, we are. Westminster system is dark. That's right. People are relying on us to be ready to fight and to win. Yep, John, spot on. I'm with you all the way, pal. We had an SNP majority. We delivered a referendum because of the result in 2011. Yeah, John, that's right. And it started getting a wee bit edgy at that point when he was talking about referendum. And of course, my nerves were absolutely right, because he said, we are going to win big. We are going to win big. Not like Alex Salmond, Scotland's going to win big, but we are going to win big. We're going to get a majority for the SNP, and your heart was in your bloody boots, because he was talking about victory for the SNP, not victory for Scotland. So he went on, we are Scotland's party and Scotland's voice must be heard. The SNP is not Scotland's voice. Scotland's voice is for independence, and Scotland's voice is for a credible route to independence that actually works. And what was delivered yesterday was a route to independence that's the road to nowhere. It's going nowhere. And the reason for it is this. You can engineer an SNP majority in that parliament on about 35% of the vote. And if you've got 35% of the popular vote, you can whistle for a referendum because you've not got a popular majority. And in 35% of the vote with a majority of the seats in the parliament, and you go to the UN or you go to the European Union and you chap the door at any international organisation and you say, please help us, please recognise us as an independent country because they bullies down in Westminster, whose route we used, aren't recognising us. You'll be laughed off the park. And the reason for it is that you don't have a majority of the popular vote. So to win independence, to talk as the lawyer who spoke for the SNP leadership motion yesterday spoke, you need to follow precedent. And the precedents that you have to follow are those of the other countries in the world that had the gumption to fight and contend for independence democratically, because what each and every one of them did was they got a majority of the popular vote and a majority of the seats. The SNP cannot achieve both of those by themselves, but with a united campaign, they can get both a majority of the votes and a majority of the seats. And that is the political democratic legitimacy that people want to see domestically and internationally. And that's what will give us independence. All the other stuff is icing on a cake that you burnt because you left it in the oven for far too long. Nobody's buying it, nobody's eating it, and we're all pig sick at the result of it. So I would go back to Keith Brown. And you know, as I said, I sat for a wee while going over all of this yesterday because I just became absolutely incredulous. What he was saying was why the list vote is so important. And a big story about why you had to vote SNP in the constituency and on the list, because that's the only way the SNP will get a majority. And he spoke about things that I did agree with up to a point to do with our place in Europe. However, he tagged it onto the European Union, forgetting that should be a question for the people of Scotland after we're independent.
Correct.
He spoke about Westminster and what have you, and then he said, the people are sovereign. The people are sovereign. John Swinney said the people are sovereign. Well, if the people of Scotland are sovereign on the one hand, you do not have to go to Westminster with a begging bowl on the other. You can't have it both ways. You can't hitch your wagon to, we need to get a referendum because the people are sovereign. What you do is you go to the people and you say to the people, you are sovereign, and this is the way to vote to prove and to exercise your democratic right for self-determination. And these are the words, these are the actions, these are the steps that for credibility and for popularity and for success for Scotland should have been laid out yesterday and were not. Instead, Keith Brown repeated what he said for at least the last 4 years about how we're going to have a convention, independence is within touching distance. And he said the convention started, and then he said it's starting tomorrow and it'll be a convention including civic bodies. Well, Keith, you've had my phone number for the last 20 bloody years. When are you going to use it? Because see, when you don't, not only am I standing against you, I'll be taking your seat and I'll be going to Holyrood to represent the people of Clackmannanshire and Dunblane, and I'll be telling the world that I'm there and only there because you and the likes of you did not do the job that you've been elected to do since 2015.
Here's a wee guess. I mean, a wee, Mystic Meg, this convention, if it ever happens, we were promised one in 2020, it still hasn't, but let's say it goes ahead, I can assure you that you will not receive a phone call either, that, Colette Walker will not receive a phone call, that David McCutcheon will not receive a phone call, because they want independence. They don't want to stay in the party, the British bit. And on that, Lloyd, a few years back at conference, I don't know if you were at the one where Angus Brendan and Chris McElhenney tried to get a debate on, say, Plan B. and they get booed down, shouted down, never happened. Well, here was something similar. At the end of yesterday, Graham McCormick said this when interviewed after the vote, had decided status quo, we're staying British, we're not going for independence.
John is still to answer the question, what happens when they say no? And he said that, he wasn't going to tell us what strategies he had to counteract that. This is such a momentous thing, creating new states, that he's got to be open with the public and open with us and be transparent and tell us what he's going to do.
The fact that we've now got a policy that we can all get behind is absolutely fantastic, and there is no doubt that the strongest possible mandate to deliver independence for Scotland is an SNP majority, and delivering on what has come before it as well. I've got no crystal ball, but I'll be out every day, pounding the streets, knocking doors to make it work. That's my job as a candidate, and that's what I'll be aiming to deliver.
I'm quite happy with that. I'm content with that. But what I think was good, that the alternative views were all openly discussed at the conference, and so now we've agreed we're going forward as one, united.
I think it will work. I think that we have right on our side, and I think bringing it to the conference for a major debate like this lends legitimacy to what he's trying to achieve.
I started out properly campaigning and knocking doors at the lowest of the lows in 2023 when we were really struggling, and I got shouted at. And I think what we've seen on the John Swinney is that we were rebuilding that trust, and you can see it on the doorstep, and you can see it within the public mood.
Apart from Graham McCormick, I would like to say that if anyone's passing by Don Roberto's grave or Winnie Ewan or Margaret MacDonald, they'll hear a whirring sound, because that sort of summed up everything that's wrong with the party.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Intellectually bereft, entirely intellectually bereft. People seeking for handing over all responsibility for their own thinking to a leadership who don't have the ability to think for themselves. I despair. I mean, well done, Graham McCormick, but let's be brutally honest. Graham McCormick had an opportunity to prevent this whole caper 2 years ago when he said he was going to stand for the leadership of the election, took a phone call, the leadership of the party, took a phone call from honest John Swinney and decided that he would step down. Graham could have stopped this in its tracks right there and then. Now, I admire what they've done, and I admire this kind of last stand of those with integrity in the Scottish National Party. But the fact of the matter is, yesterday's debacle for supporters of independence was the most obvious thing that was going to happen. It's it's in the nature of the current Scottish National Party for the leadership to ignore completely the membership. I mean, I found it touching that one of the people responding to the questions there was said, "Well, at least we had the debate. We had the debate, and now we can all just get behind the leader." It's a bloody nonsense. Were any of those people listening, or are their ears painted on, or are they made of cloth? From one sentence to the next, both John, Keith Brown, and the others who supported the party, the leadership motion, effectively cut the ground from their own arguments. But where are we at right now? The obvious thing to learn from that particular section is that the Scottish National Party no longer has the fire in its belly that it did have. That what it's done is it has handed over all responsibility for moving and it's the party forward. It's not moving independence forward. It's not moving the country forward. Everything that everyone said there was on the basis of the party. And the problem here is this. John Swinney has always been a party before country person. I mean, I know that again from the time when he was the leader of the party, when I was a member of the Scottish Parliament, that the party always comes first, and John will talk up the party even in the face of absolute truths, like he's doing at the moment. 11 local council by-elections in a row, the SNP vote has plummeted, even in seats which they had previously held. Now, if you're going into the election next year, even with 35% of the vote, and that's what people are saying to you, or to the pollsters, if the reality is when an actual election comes along that SNP voters don't go out and vote, then that's what's going to happen. People are not going to go out and vote. What have they got to go out and vote for? Genuinely, what have they got to go out and vote for when we have there's no policy being put forward that you can say to people is, this is our strategy for the future. This is the strategy that's going to get the country moving. This is the strategy that's going to realise the potential of all the citizens of the country. There's nothing there. Everything is geared up entirely to vote for the SNP, vote for the SNP, vote for the SNP. And unfortunately, the current membership, or certainly the membership that were in attendance in Aberdeen yesterday, seem to be the people who have completely and utterly abandoned any personal responsibility for politics. They are handed it over to Keith Brown, to John Swinney, to Kate Forbes, to Tommy Shepherd. They've handed over the responsibility for the development of the future strategy to the Scottish National Party to people who are intellectually bereft. Now, how anyone in the Scottish National Party can look back over the past 11 years, 12 years, and say that the SNP has been successful in any way whatsoever, they would have to be absolutely stupid, because the SNP has not been successful in the past 12 years. The vast majority of the things that were stated from the platform yesterday by people in support of the leadership position, the achievements of the SNP, you could pretty well put them down to the achievements of the SNP between May 2011 and September the 18th, 2014. That's the fact. The Queen's Ferry Crossing was built then. The support for families was built then. The removal of tuition fees. All of the things which were tripped off the tongue of the leadership acolytes yesterday were all achieved under the leadership of Alex Salmond. No one else, you know. But at the same time, we have a party which will claim those as their great achievements, while at the same time pretend entirely that an individual called Alex Elliott Salmond never existed. The single longest leader of the Scottish National Party effectively has been consigned to the dustbin of history by the current Scottish National Party. That in itself tells you everything you need to know about both the integrity, the honesty, and the intellectual level upon which the SNP is based. It's based on nothing but lies and obfuscation. That's a fact. And this is what people have to waken up to. And to some degree, people are waking up to that. That's why they're not going out and voting for the Scottish National Party in local government by-elections, or indeed in by-elections for Westminster. Next year has to be when the people reassert themselves and reject the Scottish National Party, because the Scottish National Party has rejected the people of this country.
Absolutely it has. Absolutely. But here's the thing, Alan. While they're talking about, getting this SNP 1-2 in a big, massive majority, the Scottish Attitude Survey was out this week, and it's showing that confidence in the Scottish government's never been lower. That's the thing. And this article by Kirsten, it said, never been lower than it is now. And on the back of that, they're going to try and, swim against the tide and get a majority. They're delusional.
Yeah, I mean, one thing about Alex Salmond, people thought that he left the government in 2014. But before he left, he had a plan for the future. And that plan is what Nicola Sturgeon ran for the first 5 years of her term. That's why it still looked like a bit of a competent government at that stage. Once that was over with, they had to think for themselves. And like Lloyd has said, they're not very good at thinking for themselves, because we have gone downhill ever since. They have been infiltrated by lobbyists, careerists, and they have pushed independence to the side and brought up these policies that people just do not support. I mean, that video that you showed with the guy at the end with the yellow, he said 23 people were shouting at him. Yeah, and that was the independent supporters. See, when we were campaigning at your age, we were getting bricks thrown at us because we were trying to convince people to vote for independence. We did it before it was popular. We won that argument. You're now trying to destroy it. Now, like I've said, in 2026, we have 72 seats that we need to cover in constituencies. So please come forward. We have 21 at this present time. And I'll remind you all about a document written by Bernard of Kilwinning. For as long as 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be brought under English rule. It is in truth, not for glory, not for riches, nor for honours, that we are fighting, but for freedom, for that alone which no honest man gives up but with his life. We only need half of those 100 people to come forward now to stand up for Scotland and to win our freedom. So please get in touch as soon as possible.
Indeed. Eva, it's just incredible that we find ourselves. I wonder how many of those people in the audience now, we've been around a while. I didn't recognise many of the speakers. A lot of them I did, but a lot of them I didn't. And when it's panned to the audience, how many of them are post-2014? How many of them don't know about the battle that Alan talks about that we all fought, that have come in and it's just treating it as just another British party?
The vocabulary of those who supported the leadership was about supporting the SNP as a party. It was about party before country. It was not about the good of the country. And that was very plain and simple to see. And that's the difference between the SNP and Liberate Scotland, the Independence for Scotland Party, Sovereignty, and may I also say ALBA. And I really hope that ALBA decide to join Liberate Scotland, because what yesterday made crystal clear is that the SNP need to be challenged on the constituencies, because very many of their candidates are there for the sake of party. That was evident because in the main, if not exclusively, they voted for that leadership motion. They didn't rebel against it, as far as I know. I'm not aware of a single parliamentary candidate for Holyrood 26 in the SNP who supported any of the amendments. If I'm wrong, please come forward and correct me. But these people are exactly what Scotland does not want. We don't need any more toadies. We don't need any more newly arrived folk that have come into the party who see a career in politics and they happen to choose the SNP because they think that they remain in positions of power and in the ascendancy. And what we really require are people who don't want to be politicians. Alan doesn't want to be in Holyrood. I didn't want to be in Holyrood. But the reason that we're standing for it is because we're sick to the bloody back teeth of watching the people that we trusted rip up the promises that they made to us and betray our trust. Alan and I are not the greatest politicians on the planet. We're not omniscient. We don't know everything about everything, but what we don't know, we go and ask and we find out about and we do our best. We make mistakes every day. I put my foot in my mouth every time I open it. But there is no question that Alan and I want independence for Scotland. And there will be hundreds of people watching this podcast who are just like us, who want independence for Scotland, who've got abilities, who've got powers, who've got the opportunity and the ability to speak to the ordinary man and woman in the street and talk to them about why we should not have the highest energy bills in Europe, about why our children shouldn't be using school clothing banks, about how working poor should exist no more because nobody who works should be poor, about how we could recreate the proper educational opportunities that Scotland used to give to everybody, what we can do to address the housing crisis, what we can actually do to make the world a better place for the ordinary people of Scotland, for the small folk. And the folk that know that best are people who are living these lives now, not those who are in ivory towers, who are middle class or upper class, that have got fancy accents and fancy backgrounds and come from positions of privilege. The people that are best to sit in that parliament now, at this time in Scotland's history, are those that come from the backgrounds that Alan and I had, that came from basically very, very little in some instances and were able to struggle and work and get on somewhere in life because we either had a combination of parents that made us and encouraged us to do better, or we had teachers that did so, or we had friends or role models that pointed us in the right direction some of the time and were able to give us a leg up when we needed it, or a foot up the backside if that was what we deserved. It's people that understand that way of life and that understand the Scottish psyche that should be sitting in that parliament. And if it was populated by folk like that, you wouldn't be hanging about with a begging bowl pleading for a Section 30. You would be standing up there day in and day out and shouting and screaming for Scotland and for Scotland's interests and for Scotland's independence at every opportunity. And that's what Scotland needs. You know, as Alan had said, we fight not for glory, nor for honours, nor for riches, but for freedom only and alone. But we fight for freedom to turn Scotland into the country that we know it can be. And that's not going to happen with a mealy-mouthed, twisted, double-crossing of the SNP leadership that you saw yesterday. So those in the SNP that supported the amendment or that wanted to support the amendment, come home to Liberate Scotland and help us liberate Scotland.
Yeah. The clock's beating us. We're really getting time against us, Lloyd. But I want to cover one topic. You know, one of the things, you know, this is John's played into the British hands by doing this. It will not upset the British. However, here's Craig Murray, God bless him. He is taking to the Court of Session an act. He's going against the prescription of a Palestine action group. And what he's saying is simply this, that under Scots law, it shouldn't be allowed. Now, this could very easily cause confrontation of a constitutional manner with England. That's the sort of things that the SNP should be doing every time, giving them things to fight back and fight against, not giving in.
Yes, absolutely. But I think this will be another case where we'll find that Craig is absolutely correct, that the case will proceed. And then I think we'll have the Scottish National Party turning around and saying, we don't want an argument over this. This is about national security. This is about the protection of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I expect nothing from the current Scottish National Party government, particularly membership also. The fact of the matter is that, yes, the Palestine Action prescription was an absurdity. Even the intelligence services of the British state have said publicly that they believe it's a nonsense. So yeah, let's create a crisis on a constitutional basis on a piece of nonsense law from England. But I think all it will do is it will show us yet again that the Scottish National Party will toe the line as laid out by Westminster.
Listen, we're coming to the end, folks, so just a couple of things, if I may, before we go. We all believe in Scottish independence. I would think safe to say we're all good Scottish patriots. And there was none greater than King Robert the Bruce, the man who in adversity managed to pull together the nation, the man that had to sit in a cave. We all know the story about the spider, the man that had to hide, but he stayed the distance. He only had the one vision of having Scotland independent. That was his view, and he rallied the people. And then we know at 1314 he won the Battle of Bannockburn, which guaranteed it, and by 1322 they'd signed the peace agreement with England. That's our role model. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the which are you, Robert the Bruce or John Swinney? Get in touch with Liberate Scotland. We need to save our country. Until I see you again, you and yours, please, please, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.